Hello, I'm Jonathan van Bilsen, and welcome to the speaker series presented by the Scugog Chamber of Commerce. Our guest today is Matthew Somerville, one of the owners of Two Blokes Cider, a new cidery in Scugog Township and certainly making its mark. Before we begin, I'd like to ask Michael Phillip, the president of the Scugog Chamber, to say a few words. Michael?
Thank you, John. Hello, I am Michael Phillip, president of the Scugog Chamber of Commerce. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this edition of our speaker series, brought to you by Enbridge Gas. The Scugog Chamber of Commerce is very grateful to Enbridge Gas for sponsoring our speaker series, as it enables us to put the message out to all of our members as well as the community through Rogers TV. On today's show, we welcome Matthew Somerville from Two Blokes Cidery, which is located in Seagrave, just north of Port Perry. Matthew opened his cidery in the midst of the pandemic, and it quickly gained popularity. Many of their wonderful products are highly sought after, and new ones are always a joy to try out. Matthew is a very active community member in Scugog Township, and I am happy to work with him on the Scugog Chamber Board of Directors. John, I will turn it back to you.
As I mentioned, our guest today is Matthew Somerville, one of the owners of Two Blokes Cider. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So, I don't know that much about cider, and I'm looking forward to learning all about it. But let's talk a little bit about you first. You're born in Port Perry.
Yes,
and you went to school here. Now, I understand you went to a number of different elementary schools. Is that because there was an issue?
Well, that's a history that we don't like to get into, but I started off at Epsom for kindergarten, then Greenbank for 1 and 2, moved to R.H. Cornish for 3 and 4. Then they opened up S.A. Cocker. I went to S.A. Cocker for 5, 6, 7, 8, and then over to Port Perry High.
Okay, so it wasn't anything to do with you personally. It was just the schools were changing and opening up and such.
Sure, we'll go with that one.
So Port Perry High School, you had a number of part-time jobs while you were there.
Yeah, I was a working boy. I worked at from 14 onwards, basically,
really?
at a petting zoo, KFC. I was the rink rat at the Scugog Arena, and
what does the rink rat do?
that's the Zamboni dodger. So I had to go and move the nets when the Zamboni's cleaning it and resurfacing the ice. And then and clean the stinky locker rooms after games. So it was a glamorous job.
I thought you were going to tell me that you got to drive the Zamboni, but that wasn't in the cards?
I just got to hose it down. That was it, yeah.
Because I always thought that would be a fun job to do, drive that thing around. So now the petting zoo is interesting. You, to what extent did you participate? Like everything, feeding the animals, cleaning out the pens.
It was a farm just north of us in Brock Township, and I had to clean the pens, move the animals because we took them down to old age homes in Oshawa.
Right.
And it was a pretty nightmarish job for a 14-year-old kid. So
it would be a nightmarish job for anybody, even at my age of 40. Now you were raised on a farm, right?
Yes.
So the whole concept of working with animals was not new to you, correct?
No.
And your farm, you had cattle as well as cash crops, right?
You got it.
So were you affected by the mad cow disease that happened a few years ago?
Certainly were, and that's what actually started the whole cidery at the beginning. It got me thinking about the future of the farm and where sustainability and where farming was going. And how if there wasn't an economic basis for a farm, there wouldn't be a farm.
Okay. So I'm assuming that you also worked at the farm part-time when you were going to high school. That's like a no.
I don't know if working is the right term. I think indentured slavery is a better term, but
right. Well,
you got to pay for your stay.
I'm not going there. I know your mother. She was a counselor for quite a while with the township as well, right? So now, does your mother work at the farm still, or is she pretty well retired?
No, we still have. So my parents have an empty nest project, which are called the sheep, and so they're hand raising some sheep that get abandoned by their moms. They've got a flock of, I'm going to say about 40 sheep so far,
really?
And then we have one little bull calf as well that's living at the farm called Seamus.
Seamus, that's cute. I have very little experience. You may pick up on that. Very little experience in the farming industry, but
it was a learning curve for me too.
But I did. Yeah, but you were raised. You didn't have a choice. I had a tour of a sheep farm in Australia, and I watched them shear these sheep and that. But there was no mention about, I guess they still do all the process there.
Their market's pretty big in Australia, but they may still send it because they're just saying China's not that far away from them.
Yeah,
so
true.
Who knows? I get brought in to help corral them, but it's a very hot day usually, and I try and steer clear as much as I possibly can.
I can imagine. I didn't want to digress onto the farming. I just find it interesting. So, stuff that you don't really know anything about. So after high school, you decided you'd continue your education at U of T.
Yep.
And you took what?
I went to U of T for architecture, and I graduated from there, and then came back here and ran for council for a quick hot minute. Ended up working in the sustainability and building industry for
So let me just
years.
backtrack. So at U of T, what did you take?
Architecture.
What type of architecture though? Just general?
Just general architecture.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's a program that really kind of teaches you cities from the ground up, from buildings, urban design, and then up to urban planning.
Okay. So you have sort of an interest in the whole environmental element of architecture, I assume, just based on.
Yeah, like the landscape, like the landscape component was a significant element of it. Looking at urban systems, looking at sustainability, and that's that led into a lot of questions because BSc happened at the same time. Mad cow crisis happened at the same time I was at university, and it raised a lot of questions for me as to what's the future of farming. How do you make farming work in a changing environment? Just big questions about the future. As a fifth generation farmer, you're trying to
Of course.
figure it out.
And I'm sure farming has its challenges without question. Like I see more and more small farms being gobbled up by huge conglomerates.
Yep.
It just tends to happen. And I guess the idea of barns is a thing of the past too, because equipment is just being moved from place to place wherever it needs to be used in that. So
barns are, they're a medieval building technology that's been imported in North America. The joinery is a medieval joinery, and they just weren't able to make the transition from square bales to round bales. And so barns, in the early 2000s, you saw them falling over left, right, and center because they were just not being used anymore.
Right. Yeah, it's very sad because some of them have some historical significance too. There's a fellow, I forgot his name, but he's with the township of Markham, and what he specializes in is the history of barns. And I went to a presentation that he gave, and it was just interesting, just the way that the nails that they used and so forth, and how they used to make them, and that kind of thing. It was just very interesting, the whole element. So after U of T, you decided to run for council, you said, which is interesting. I did vote for you, by the way, because I think you were running in my ward. And you decided that wasn't for you after the outcome of the election?
I came in a close second, and it was. It got me thinking about urban planning, about the future of this area, and where we were going to be in 20 years' time, which is actually now. Right.
So what prompted you to start thinking about that? Like, what were the issues?
Well, the issues at the same time were about the Green Belt, the Places to Grow Act, urban development, urban sprawl, which I had just kind of seen Scarborough develop over my childhood, Markham explode, and the same thing for Pickering. All those areas I could see heading our direction, and so I wanted to make sure that farmland was protected, food systems were protected, and that there was a future for that kind of landscape, the agricultural landscape that is part of our culture here in the country.
It's definitely an issue. I mean, the whole urban development has been an issue for a long, long time. The counter side is the green belt, which is great to have, but unfortunately it has to be maintained by the township that it's in, but they're not generating any revenue from it, so to speak, right? So that's always an ongoing issue.
It's an ongoing issue when you have corporate farms and you're creating base commodities. What I ended up looping back to was the idea of doing value-added agriculture, and that you can produce more money on a smaller acreage. And that's really the future for farming, is not this area here, because of just the landscape in Ontario. We're so small, and we just cannot get the economies of scale that you can get in the prairies or large, western United States. The machinery is just not really designed for that. So for here, because we have 7 million people around the corner from us, there's no reason why we can't be developing agriculture that works for that, that feeds that group. Yeah.
Interesting. So how would you propose to do that, different from what's being done?
There's a term called agricultural urbanism, which is the idea of integrating agriculture into new developments. And it helps, so you're looking at small scale farms that are 5, 10 acres. They're community supported agriculture, so they're creating good food baskets.
Right.
They're ecological. They're not producing a lot of noxious fumes. And it also acts as a way of kind of bringing a community together. So it's, instead of just having a park, it's you're celebrating the changing of the seasons.
Okay.
So that's actually happening elsewhere in the States. It's happening in Quebec. It's happening in BC.
So it's doable then. It's feasible.
It's fully feasible. It's just that it's not how things are typically done for developers.
I would assume also one of the drawbacks of having a gigantic farm is that you can't really control what happens on that farm. I mean, there's water that runs through there, and you don't really know what's happening to that water, right? Because it's all contained within one corporation's property.
Well, so as a farmer, we have to write an environmental farm plan. And so one of the things that, as a part of that plan, is to help build the ecology of the area. Restore waterways, ensure that cows aren't defecating in waterways, and provide habitat space. So there are programs that are in place to help facilitate that.
All right.
Large farms still do it too. You'll see that they're letting some areas go fallow between rows, planting to provide pollinary space. Oh my gosh.
I can't help you out on that word.
Sorry, pollinators.
Okay.
So space for butterflies, bees,
right,
pollinators.
Okay.
So yeah, like there's things that are happening right now, but at the same breath, there's also a push for more larger scale agriculture, and so there's always that tension.
Right. So let's take it back now. So you ran for council. That wasn't in your game plan, so you decided to go back to Ryerson, or you went to Ryerson at that point, is that correct?
I worked in the sustainable building industry for a little bit, working on...
Can you just explain what exactly sustainable building means?
Yeah, so we reviewed new buildings that were looking to validate their environmental sustainability. So that is ensuring that they're using a minimal amount of water, energy, clean air, that they're minimizing their use of resources, so wasteful kind of design. And the idea is that you could have a net zero building, a building that doesn't actually consume energy. It is a net zero building. So I worked in that field for about 2 years, and then went back to urban planning at Ryerson.
Because urban planning is really what your interests lie, right? What your thing was.
I just kept thinking larger and larger in terms of so architecture, you're dealing on a site-specific basis. And then from an urban design, you're dealing with a specific urban neighborhood. Okay. And then it went into regional and urban planning, which is much larger. And so my area of expertise, because I grew up on the farm, really kind of revolved around that larger scale work, and specifically food and heritage. So it kind of started funneling me back into it.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, it certainly makes sense because it's in your history, it's in your blood. Why not do something good for the environment, for the world, if you have that opportunity, right?
Got it.
So then you went to work for an architectural firm.
Yes, indeed.
And that was in Toronto, right? You were living in Toronto at the time, correct?
Yes.
So the architectural firm, you were doing the same thing? You were involved in the heritage element?
Yeah, so I was working for a firm called ERA Architects. They specialize in heritage buildings in Toronto. So at the time we were working on the Art Gallery of Ontario, the ROM. There was very large cultural projects that were taking place.
Interesting.
So I was actually their first hiree as an urban planner. And then focus down on whether a building should be saved, how to integrate old buildings into new buildings.
Okay.
And because my area of specialty my area of background is rural, I worked on a number of projects that were associated with new developments in suburban areas. So in Milton, Markham, Pickering. wrote policy documents for these municipalities as well.
Okay.
So it was a kind of a, and then I also worked on one of my projects was the Downtown Heritage Conservation District in Port Perry.
Oh, interesting.
Which was a nice circle again. So it was a great project.
I mean, that's an amazing thing. I for those of you who've been to Port Perry, the downtown core is amazing. It's making its way back to the way it was in the 1880s after the big fires. And it's great that there are grants in place for store owners, for building owners. It's great that they're taking advantage of it and they're actually making the buildings look. I drive through some cities. Unionville is an example. Unionville of 25 years ago was quite quaint. Now Unionville no longer has that quaintness. And things like that. So it's really nice to see that is being brought back and that people are doing something about it. So after you did the work with ERA, you decided to go on a vacation of sorts.
Yeah, I asked to take a leave of absence. So during that whole time, I had this idea in my head about the future of the farm, trying to find a space for my work, my own personal professional work in a rural context, and I started to look at cider. I started to look at value-added agriculture. So we looked at community-supported agriculture, whether creating a CSA on the farm was an option, whether doing specific types of soybeans. So you'd have could do tofu, specialty mustards.
Okay.
But I settled on cider after I was over in the UK, and I went out for dinner with some friends. Cracked open a cider at a pub, and it reminded me exactly of the cider that we made at our house when I was a kid.
I've been to the UK a few times, and I've looked at cider too, but I've never taken it beyond that. And I don't plan to.
Well, I had been studying. I had been to the UK since 94, 96, 2002, 2007, and so I was because when I was at Port Perry High School, we used to do rugby tours.
Okay.
So
you played rugby?
I did indeed.
Okay.
And so I had seen cider move from being kind of a loutish kind of drink that you would kind of the kids would drink to actually being something that was a craft-based beverage that was really kind of akin to craft beer or craft wine. So it really kind of it was elevated by the mid 2000s, and I said, this is probably something that's going to be happening here in North America relatively shortly. So I went overseas and started to work at cider farms, based myself in London, and try to find work there.
So were people pretty helpful, pretty willing to share information?
Yeah, people were always questioning what the heck was a Canadian doing wandering around the countryside. But yeah, I worked in the New Forest at the New Forest cider, which was the cider that I tasted that I was kind of knocked my socks off. And then I worked out in the West Country in Somerset and Herefordshire at cider farms as well. So that was everyone. It's a culture. It's a deep seated culture there. And I really want to bring it back.
Has it been brewed for a long time? The cider that we know today in the UK, like has that been going for? Like cider to me
if you want to take it back to the Roman times, yes, it has been.
I knew you were going to say that. But cider in North America, to me, is something that in the last 10 years has sort of made its mark. I'm sure there was cider being produced before that. But in the UK, has it been established longer?
Yeah. Apples weren't originally from England.
I didn't know that. Where did they originate?
They're actually from Kazakhstan.
Interesting.
They came from Kazakhstan via the Silk Road to the Roman Empire. And the Romans then brought apples to the UK.
Wow, that's interesting. And then consequently to North America.
Consequently, they made their way all around, yeah.
I didn't know that. So you planted a test orchard, you said?
Yes.
And that consisted of 50 some odd trees. You're running back and forth all over the neighborhood because you're living in Toronto, you're working in Richmond Hill, you've got these 50 trees that probably cost a fortune that you have to be nurtured. Was that a fun time in your life?
Yeah, I was living. I was living my weekends in an RV. It was my pied sur terre, not so it's a little above the ground on wheels. So that kind of got me. It got me into the country and it got me used to the work that needed to be done.
And this was on your parents' farm.
This is on my parents' farm.
Right.
Yeah.
So the apples that you grew. Now, you were mentioning before we went on the air that they're not the same kind of apples that you eat. the ones that you grow for cider, correct?
Yeah, so apples, cider fruit fall into a quadrant. So it's bitter sharp, bittersweet, sweet, bittersweet. So they're your sweet apples are your delicious Max Galas, but everything else in those three other quadrants are cider fruit. So you need to have the sharps, the bitter sharps, in order to get structure, in order to provide acidity and balance. If you just used just sweet apples, you end up with a very soft cider. And also the acidity isn't even right, so you end up getting bad pathogens in the product itself. So it may actually just turn to vinegar.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. So once you determine the apples that you're going to use, it becomes sort of a testing process, right? Like it's a hit or miss. This is going to work. This is not going to work. But you don't know until after you try it, correct?
So when I was in the UK, I knew that there were single varietal apples that were of value. So Kingston Blacks, Yarlington Mills, Dabinets are all known as a proper single varietal apple because it falls close to the center of that quadrant. So we planted a lot of those apple varieties. Unfortunately, Yarlington Mill does not do well in the North American climate, which I found out after the fact. Kingston Black, marginally better. Dabinet does very well.
And that's an expensive way of finding out.
It's a very expensive way to find out because no one was growing them.
So how many trees do you have now?
We have about 4,000.
Wow, that's interesting. So you've moved now to the Scugog area, and you and Andy opened up the cidery in 2017. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so how many liters of cider are you producing now?
We're in the 40 to 50,000 liter range at this point.
Okay. So 4,000 trees. Okay, this is. I'm trying to get my head around this. How do you get these apples? Do you and Andy go out and pick them every day? You get your mom involved with her gator driving around the property?
So a lot of our products actually. So we do a blend. So part of some of ours there's a brewery model, which is when you're producing a same product consistently again and again, and there's a winery winery model in which once that vintage is complete, the vintage is done. Right. So the apples that we grow from our farm typically go into our vintage stream, which is the winery stream, which is that when a product is completed, it's completed. But the majority of our cider actually comes from a blend of our stream, so a blended brewery type stream. So we're able to get juice from Algoma and Newcastle.
Okay.
So that's what makes up the majority of our cider juice, and then we're blending that with our own product to make our mainstay, which is our hex press dry cider. Okay. So that's what's driving a lot of that product because that's something that's in the LCBO. Right. It's in grocery stores, and
so you're selling your product through the LCBO as well.
Correct.
Excellent. And I did hear somewhere that some of your ciders are whiskey based. Is that correct?
Well, some of our products we've used whiskey barrels.
Okay.
So we've made Cider. So that's with a honey. So that's a mead and cider hybrid. Okay. And then we aged that in whiskey barrels for over 2 years.
Okay. It's quite an investment in time, and I'm sure you'll reap the benefits from it as time goes on. I won't even hesitate to guess how much it costs to set up a cidery because I've seen the equipment. It's not cheap. It's a heck of a process. Is the maintenance difficult? Not the apples and such, but is there a lot of work involved in keeping it going? Or
the process relies on cold temperatures. So really it's a lot simpler than a brewery. Okay. We're much more akin to a winery. So we're working in between 10 and 12, maybe 14 degrees is the ideal temperatures for fermentation.
So winter is great for you.
Fall, winter, obviously it makes sense because you're cooling down. So our space is designed to be able to kind of open up the cellar story windows, let the space breathe, cool it down, keep the yeast happy. Really, it's we let nature do a lot of the work itself. We're also starting to move into wild fermentation, so we're now feeling more confident in the flora at the farm and being able to build out and use the natural flora. So we're not using cultured yeast. Okay,
interesting. So, what's the process time from the time that you pick the apples until it's in a bottle?
So it varies between 6 months to 2 years.
Okay.
So for some of our products,
depending on what, the apples? Or?
It depends on the apples. Depends on the type of product that we're making. Depends on the as cider ages like wine, it gets softer, it gets rounder. We do a lot of blending with new cider and older cider so that we have both an edginess to it, the acidity like a Beaujolais, and then we also have more rounded. It's like a nice barrel aged Cabernet. So we play a little bit on both because you really want to have that acidity and that roundness is kind of what you're trying to go with.
Okay. So because this show is a chamber show, we should mention the fact that you are a member of the board of directors for the Chamber of Commerce.
Am indeed.
And enjoying that very much, I assume, because it puts you in touch with many, many different businesses and so forth, correct?
Yeah, it's exciting. It's great to be able to be an agricultural voice on the Chamber. So
the Chamber is hosting a craft beer festival shortly after this show airs. So give us a little bit of info on that.
It's a craft beer and cider festival.
I meant to say the Chamber is hosting a craft cidery festival where they're going to have some beer.
That's better. So we're it's going to be held in Palmer Park. We're excited to be able to bring this festival back after the pandemic.
Right. This is the first time you've had it in the last few years?
Yeah, it's been shut down. So it's going to be a great festival. We're going to have live music, food, and lots of festivities.
And the date is August the 6th? Is it?
It's August 5th and 6th.
5th and 6th, okay. And it's at Palmer Park, you said?
Yes.
Okay. So what sort of, who can we expect to see there? Like, how does it work? Do I go to each booth and drink as much as I want to pay for, sort of thing? Or is it one ticket gets you as much as you want?
That would be a dangerous game to be playing, especially for you. But
oh dear, he knows me.
We're going to be, so it's a ticket process. It's going to be, so one ticket gets you a drink. Okay. Best thing to do would be to check out the website and to find out more information, go to the Chamber of Commerce website, or go to the festival website.
Okay, we can put that on the screen, I believe. Excellent. I was going to ask you about the future. We're running low on time, so in 1 minute or less, where does the cidery business go?
So the cidery is really the beginning of a much larger project at the farm. So I'm farming on 6.5 acres of 120 acres.
Okay.
My goal is to actually open up the circle of farming, which is continuing getting smaller and smaller, to newcomers and to other people who are interested in farm businesses. So the objective is to create long-term leases on the property. So there would be 5, 10, 20 acre leases, which you'd then be sharing cold storage, irrigation, tractors, and you'd also be able to kind of create a little bit of a nucleus and a center that's operating together. So you're kind of it's a kind of a co-working space,
like a commune sort of a concept.
Not quite, more of an accelerator. So we're kind of moving. So it's there's business incubators that are out there for farm businesses. There already exists at DC at Durham College, as well as Clearwater Farms out in Guelph. And in here, what we're doing is taking those businesses that have been already incubated and accelerating those businesses into value-added agriculture. And so there'd be for-profit businesses that would be operating under a not-for-profit farm structure. Excellent. So the goal here is to actually make this thing replicable so that we can actually start localizing our food systems.
Okay. Matthew, unfortunately, our time has come to an end. It's been a pleasure. I've learned a lot. I think it's very interesting. I know very little about the cidery business, but I've learned a lot more now. So thank you very much for being our guest. I also wanted to take this opportunity to thank Enbridge Gas for sponsoring today's program. On behalf of the Scugog Chamber of Commerce, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time right here on Rogers TV.